Hey, welcome to my store. Hey, where's all the food? It's a bad year for food. The food's all in the back. So how much for a bag of rice and a bag of apples? Yeah, that'll be $10,000. I can't afford that. It's a drought. No one can afford it. You could give me your kid. No! You could eat your kid. No! Well then, those locust and cactus pads are looking mighty fine over there.
Alright, that previous video may come across as just a goofy sketch. But what it is a depiction of a growing phenomenon. This phenomenon is known as climate famine. Now, what is climate famine? Climate famine is a famine caused by crop devastation that is caused at its source by climate change. Often it is caused by a drought, and it is very dangerous. One prominent example of climate famine is the 2019 Madagascar famine. Millions went hungry. People were forced to sell all of their belongings just to afford to eat like a human. Others were forced to eat insects and cactuses just to survive. This is a very dangerous threat. But there are many, many ways to counter it. In this video, I will be going over two. These are the two that intersect with both food and climate mitigation. But there are many others, and essentially every climate mitigation strategy will work against climate famine. It is just these two are the most related to both food and climate. So the first we're going to be discussing is genetically modified organisms. Now, genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs, have a very bad rap these days. They are thought to be unnatural and unhealthy. But that is not really the case. It is, in essence, just changing a crop to be more useful to humans. Now, in this context, I'm referring to the biochemical process of genetically modifying organisms, which splices a gene out of one plant and places it into another. And this allows chemists, rather than selective breeding, which allows basically the selection of the traits of one plant to be inserted into another in total. But when referring to the biochemical process, this subtracts a specific trait and adds it into another plant. Now, this phenomenon, this technique really, I should say, is very useful for climate mitigation because it can increase crop yields by 10 to 20%. That is 10 to 20% more food. And it also reduces emissions around, I read 34 million tons, and I'll cite all sources for this video in the description. But 34 million tons of carbon can be removed from the emissions created by the farming industry just by using genetically modified organism techniques. Now, this is a very helpful thing to use, and as it creates more food and also reduces the carbon footprint of the farming industry. Needless to say, there will be some trade-offs, and nothing can be an unmitigated good, but this will be a very useful technique, and it needs to be destigmatized because there is so much stigma from certain people that really could be very detrimental to climate if we don't overcome this as a society. Now, the second technique I will be going over is called carbon sequestration. Now, carbon sequestration is a technique where a chemical reaction takes in atmospheric carbon dioxide and converts it into a stable, non-gaseous product. Now, you may recognize this description as the way plants photosynthesize. They take in carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen and glucose, which takes in that carbon dioxide and prevents it from being re-emitted and causing harm to the environment. Now, this would work to prevent climate famine in multiple ways. Now, there is what is known as soil carbon sequestration, wherein the soil takes up carbon dioxide, and this actually produces more fertile soil for plants to grow in, which helps to produce more fertile plants that grow more and it can also support more plant life in the area. Now, this would be helpful because it can create more arable land. Now, there is other methods. There's the technological method of carbon sequestration, which creates things like graphene, which is used in various products across industries. The cell phone that I am recording this has graphene in it, and doubtless the cell phone you are watching this has graphene in it. Now, this is a very helpful thing because both it helps with carbon emissions, which in turn prevents further climate famine, but also it helps create consumer technology, and that is something everybody uses pretty much. Now, this would be a really useful thing to further the use of, and while nature does this to some degree by itself, with just trees and plants and algae, and also soil and rocks create carbon sequestration, but if humans can encourage this and further it with development of further technological techniques to combat carbon emission, we can reverse a lot of the damage humanity has already done. It is important that we involve ourselves in this fight. As citizens of the global community, there's only so much one person can do. You or I cannot do very much. Bringing awareness to these issues and giving information about these solutions is pretty much all a single individual can do, in any place, really. But organized humans, protests, can get laws passed that will cap carbon emissions and encourage the use of GMOs and carbon sequestration. And governments can further these causes by subsidizing carbon sequestration technology and GMO usage for the purposes of climate regulation. And that will be a really great help of the governments so that we can ultimately fight back this issue. So, to conclude, this is an important fight, and one we must take on together. But it is not an unwinnable one. We can beat back this tide of climate famine and make a better world for ourselves and for our future and for the future generations.